So in this lesson we're going to focus on 5 key elements of maintaining a good sounding note when playing guitar. And the first is precision over speed. That is, we're going to talk about how to practice playing and what to focus on when you're working on making those good notes. Second is to practice unplugged. And that is, before you start messing around with amp settings and so forth, you need to get good sounding notes just unplugged. Even on an electric guitar, you can still hear it playing, so we're going to discuss why that's so important. Number 3 is volume versus gain. This is a somewhat confusing topic, particularly for beginners looking at electric guitars and trying to understand the different ways that you achieve tone and volume. So we're going to talk about the differences and how to balance them. Number 4 is we're going to look at clean versus distorted channels when working through an amp and what that means and why you should start with clean tones and only then later develop with distortion and effects and that sort of thing. And then finally, number 5, we're going to look at using the volume and tone knobs and how those contribute when feeding through an amp to get a good sounding note. So stay tuned. We're going to break down making good sounding notes, good sounding single notes on electric guitars. With each of these videos, I like to highlight the guitar that I'm using for the purposes of the video, and in this one we are going to be using a new Squier Telecaster Deluxe. This is a Sweetwater exclusive Silverburst and it's unusual for Fender. Fender usually has single coils. This has 2 humbuckers and 4 knobs. Very unusual. This is often referred to as like the 70s setup of a Telecaster, and you can also get, there's a higher end 70s classic vibe. There's also a Troublemaker. So there's some really cool configurations within the Squier brand for this kind of guitar, but it is basically trying to compete with a Les Paul in terms of the overall setup, where the switch is, what kind of knobs and so forth. But it's a very cool guitar, very, it's an under $300 guitar, and you can check out my review of it. I think it's really quite an excellent guitar, and another demonstration that Squier is really producing some excellent instruments. So number 1, just very quickly, I want to discuss the issue of speed and precision and their relationship. And I know it can be very tempting as a new guitarist to try, like you've figured out a sequence of notes and you just want to shred on it, you just want to go fast and just get that speed, you want to start sounding like Van Halen or whatever, But the reality is, before you can make good fast notes, you need to make just simply good notes. And so to begin with, you should really focus on precision. And that is, if you need to slow down, if you're working on a riff, if you're working on a melody or something, slow down and play it slower than you would when you're actually playing it, and then work up to full speed. I know it can seem boring, but the reality is that you want to get those notes sounding good before you try accelerating and making them faster and working up to full speed and so forth. Just out of the gate, your emphasis in making notes should be on precision and the quality of that individual note, and not about how fast you can get through notes and so forth. All of that will come with practice, but if you focus on speed too early, it's going to end up sounding sloppy, and you're going to kind of put the cart before the horse. So to start out with, just focus on precision and technique in achieving those good notes, and then work up to speed and faster attacks. Number 2, when you're beginning, and even as an advanced player, this is a very good idea to do, and that is to play unplugged. As an electric guitarist, of course, you're not going to make much sound, which if you're younger and like living with your folks, they probably appreciate that. But the reason why I'm steering you towards starting out playing unplugged is that you've really got to be able to get good sounds out of your guitar before you start messing around with amps. And so this just begins with just playing around with it unplugged. Don't worry about an amp, don't worry about all the knobs and everything. To begin with, just try to be able to get good sounding individual notes. And what you're trying to avoid, the kind of pitfalls, particularly as you're beginning, is either pressing not enough where you get crackling, or it's not holding the note properly, or you're pressing actually too hard. And if you press too hard, it will actually raise the tuning of that note and bring it out of tune. And so that's something to avoid. So you really, with a guitar, a light touch is ultimate. I know at first it can feel like, man, it's so hard to hit those frets and hold those, but I guarantee you give it time, you give it practice, and your fingers will figure it out. And there is a nice medium when achieving those good single notes, where you're not pressing too hard, you're not pressing so soft that you're getting crackling, buzzing, and so forth. You're right in between, and you get that nice sweet note. And so to begin with, this is just great general, practice advice. I advise that you work with your guitar unplugged. I'm not saying exclusively, but you want to hear what it sounds like before you start dealing with the electrical current and the amp settings and the knobs and everything. Just getting some nice sounds out of it unplugged without anything to worry about with the electronics is a great starting point, and it's a great way to be able to just practice, especially through riffs that you're trying to learn, songs that you're trying to learn, where you're not generating a lot of sound, you're not focused so much on the final product tone, you're just focusing on hitting those notes. I would also point you to the Neurotic Guitarist. He has some great videos about this whole concept of a guitar should sound good, an electric guitar should sound good unplugged before you plug it in, because if it doesn't sound good, if you're not making good notes unplugged, it's not going to transfer well into the amp. So he's one of my favorite channels on YouTube. Check him out. He's got some really funny guy, great stuff. So check him out, and he'll corroborate this idea that playing unplugged actually has a very important role in the electric guitarist's toolbox. So next up, we're going to look at the difference between volume and gain. So after you're starting to get some good notes unplugged on your guitar, you're getting more comfortable with it. As you are using the amp, as you're beginning to explore the amp, you'll notice that there is a different knob for volume than there is for gain on the amp. And so what's the deal there? Now, this is the same basic idea that you find in other AV settings, like with microphones and so forth. So if you're already familiar with that, then you've already pretty well got it. But functionally, all you need to really worry about functionally is that volume will only make it louder or quieter. Gain will actually change the sound of the electric output. As in, the guitar will sound, it'll change the tone, it'll sound different. Volume just makes it louder and softer. And so, I'm no engineer. You can go, if you're really interested in learning about how all this works and all the electronic, engineering data, it's all out there. But functionally, for getting a tone, especially if you're struggling to dial in on your amp, why is it sounding this way or that way, the volume is just going to make it louder or softer. The gain will affect the tone. And the gain is also going to make it so that if you put too much gain in it, you will end up causing a distortion. It'll get loud and crunchy and squawky, and you can start getting feedback and so forth. Generally speaking, if you are just trying to dial in the level of sound, use the volume. The gain is, play with the gain to find right where you want it in terms of the hardness of the sound. Higher gain is going to get progressively harder, fuzzier, crunchier, more distorted, until eventually there's like a cliff where it becomes noisy. And so finding the sweet spot in there is just going to be up to you figuring out exactly the style that you want to play and the notes that you want to play and the sounds that you want to make and so forth. And so here is a difference. Okay. I'm just going to turn the volume up. Same tone. Now I'm going to turn the volume back down a little bit. and crank up the gain so you can hear the difference here. You hear it's poppier, fuzzier, depending on how we have it set up. There's the more twangy sound. And this is a rather small amp. This is just a 25 watt that I have in my studio, so it's getting a little, you see, you can start to get that problem that really comes in. Now it can be the volume too, but gain is basically going to the lower that you put the gain, it's going to be smoother and softer as a sound, as a tone. As you roll the gain up, it is going to get harsher, crunchier, more distorted, more squawky, and so forth. And so generally speaking, as you're beginning your journey on guitar, I would recommend keeping the gain middle to low range and primarily focusing on raising that volume. Gain is something that is going to really particularly come in handy when you start playing around with effects and that sort of thing, which is kind of in the next level, the next stage as you move into intermediate guitaring. You start playing with effects, and there's buckets of effects out there. Gain highly will change. It has a huge impact on effects, and so as you move into effects, gain is going to become more important. But at the beginning, when you're just trying to get good, clean, mellow tones out of your guitar, you really want the gain under control, and you don't want to ride the edge too much, because it'll start sounding distorted in a really bad way, squawky and crackly and that sort of thing. So generally speaking, you want to keep the gain on the lower range, at least to start out with, and then you can start working it up as you're trying to get harder sounds and so forth. Now, number 4 is the difference between clean and distorted tones, and you should start by primarily focusing on clean tones, as we were just talking about with tone settings, with the volume and gain and so forth, that you don't want to step too hard into distortion too early, because it is kind of a cliff where you can fall off and it can become just noise at a certain point. And so to begin with, you really want some nice clean tones. You just want to focus on getting good notes, getting good sustain. You see my hand, if you want to sustain it, it's called vibrato. Just a little bit of working with your hand will give a little bit of extra sustain, and it gives a little bit of flavor. You can also vibrato by pulling the string. We'll get into all that in later lessons. But to start out with, you just want those crisp, clean tones. You don't want to move too quickly into distortion and effects, because in order for that distortion to sound good, in order to really get good at effects and harder sounds out of your guitar, you've got to start by making good, clean, soft sounds. And then you can work into making them harder through gain and effects and distortion and so forth. So that's a clean setting. Now, just very quickly, I'm going to show you what distorted sounds like. This is with high gain. Now again, and this is all, part of the process is dialing in the exact amp you've got with the exact settings. I'm getting some buzzing out of my amp. Just, it's something that I can eliminate with a little bit of tweaking, roll this up, roll this down, and so forth. There's that distorted edge. And generally speaking, when you switch over to distortion, you're going to need to drop your volume down. It will just talk in just a minute about knobs and how to use knobs and so forth. But when you switch over to high gain distortion, you've got to roll the volume back, where again it quickly becomes just noise. But that's where to begin on this, is to start with the clean tones and then work into the distorted tones. The more that you really sharpen your clean tone abilities, the more that will transfer in the future over into heavier distorted tones and effects and so forth. Generally speaking, what you need to know about the Selector is simply that the upper pickup, the neck pickup, so up position on this, the neck pickup is going to enhance your bass tones, and that has to do with the physics of the vibration frequency of the strings and so forth. But the bass tones are going to be emphasized, and oftentimes this is associated with rhythm work, because you can strike more notes in a chord. It sounds smoother. The lower, the bridge pickup, is going to be more for lead or treble work. It is going to emphasize your high tones, and of course putting it in between is just going to simply mix them and give you a little of each. Now, in terms of the knobs, you've got volume knobs and you've got tone knobs. Some guitars just have two, one of each. There are even some guitars that don't have tone knobs, but that's rather unusual nowadays. Usually you at least have one of each. You might have one volume and two tone, as with many Stratocasters, or in this case, which is also typical of Les Pauls, you've got four, where you've got a volume for each pickup and a tone for each pickup. Now, the volume is relatively self-explanatory in terms of it is how much output, how much sound is coming out of that pickup. Now, one thing, a pitfall for beginning and getting into guitar and trying to get good tones out of it, a pitfall is just cranking your pickup volume to 10 and just leaving it there. This is not ideal. Generally speaking, and this is also going to extend to your tone, generally speaking, the best tones that you're going to get out of a guitar are going to be somewhere in between. I really like 6 to 8 on volume, generally speaking, for that's my full volume, and I put it down to more like 3 if I'm trying to cut that channel, if I'm trying to cut that pickup a little bit. But generally speaking, don't just crank them all the way up to 10. If it's not loud enough and you feel like you need to go to 10, then turn up your amp or whatever it is that you're running your guitar through. That needs to be raised. Don't just go straight to 10. You want that extra room, so if you drive it up to 10, it's kind of like hitting overdrive. Turn it up to 11, like the Spinal Tap, real silly Spinal Tap folks. Turn it up to 11. Don't generally play with everything cranked to 10. I would say a good starting point is to put everything at about, again, 6 to 8, 7-ish, and then start playing around with it and then work from there. But you want that extra, it's called headroom. You want that extra headroom above where you have it dialed in volume-wise. It's just going to give you a cleaner tone. It's going to make the guitar less squawky. By having it cranked up to 10, it's going to be very, very sensitive, and so every little buzz that you get is going to be more emphasized. You're going to get cleaner, creamier tones out of it if you have the volume rolled back. Same thing goes for tone. Now, what the tone does in terms of the electronic signal, the electric signal that's going out of the guitar into the amp and then being amplified by the amp, the tone affects how much treble response that pickup has. Okay, so I'm going to isolate and I'm going to crank it up to 10 all the way, just so you can really emphasize, you can really hear the difference. Now this is 10 and 10 in terms of the tone. You hear it's got that twangy, kind of squawky. And you hear when I do like a slide, it's kind of tinny sounding. Again, this is 10 and 10. Now, just for purposes here, let me crank the volume down a little bit. As you work the volume down, it gets less squawky. again, this is with the tone all the way cranked up. So I'm going to, again, here's like one of the all-time country, you know, flavor licks, the string spread. So you hear the twang there, very, very high end. Twang is associated with treble response. Okay, now I'm going to put the tone all the way down. So you see, it's with the tone down, it's a much different flavor. That's all the way down and all the way up. It's, in a sense, it's just reducing the treble, so it's kind of muting the treble. And you should still be able to get good solid bass notes out. This is a sign of a, you know, a decent guitar, is that even with the tone all the way down, this is a warning, and it's a good thing to, if you're demoing a guitar and looking at one, thinking about purchasing it, roll the volume and tone all the way up, and then put that tone all the way down, and then see, are you getting at least decent sounds out of both, you know, all the way up tone, all the way down, and you know, that'll give you some idea of if the wiring is any good and the electronics are any good. And so, again, in terms of achieving that good, clean tone, you really don't want all the way up or all the way down. What you want is somewhere in between. The positions I would steer you towards is, again, that like 6 to 8 range on volume and tone, and then, you know, around 3, like 2 to 4, somewhere around in there. Start there, or roll it all the way up and then cut it back, or roll it all the way down and then cut it up a little bit, and play through your different levels and see where exactly is the tone that you want out of that guitar. There's so much you can do with mixing them and raising this one, cutting this one's volume up but the tone down and the tone down, but there's so much you can do. It's a lot of fun just exploring tones and so forth, but you need to have a basic understanding of what you're doing. The volume or raising the output of that pickup, and the tone is how much treble, how much of that higher end, that twang, that tinny sound, how much of that is there, or is it more muted and softer and kind of got that won't sound. That's what the tone is going to do for you. And so, you know, have fun, enjoy this, enjoy exploring, and different guitars are going to be different too. That's, I mean, there's so many different ways you can mix pickups and electronics, and then you mix that through amps. I mean, there's just a million different sounds that you can make with an electric guitar, but it all begins with understanding the basics of how this works in terms of your selecting your pickup. This one is more for rhythm work, this one is more for lead work, and then how to mix the volume and tone and so forth to achieve a good sound. That's the foundation that you want to start with before you start trying to work into more advanced stuff and getting into effects and all of the rest of it. As always, if you enjoyed this, if you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Still in the process of building this channel, and I'm so thankful for every new subscriber that I get that gets me one step closer to monetizing. Once I can monetize, I can pour even more into guitars and share even more of this journey with y'all. So thank you for watching, and have a wonderful day.